In this episode, we are pulling back the covers on something that's probably affecting your sex life without you even knowing it. Money. Think about it for a second. Have you ever noticed how your bank account balance affects your dating confidence? Or maybe you felt that there's tension in the bedroom when there's also financial stress at home. Or perhaps you're wondering why you keep attracting partners who either can't manage their money or try to control yours. We are about to dive into how your money story, yes, those unconscious beliefs around finance, might secretly sabotage your love life and your sex life. Welcome back to The Naked Connection. This is the show that supports driven men to reach sexual mastery and build deep connections. Take a moment and hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. It's Kirsten, and today I invited Shawna Game back onto the show. Shawna is a money specialist who's helped countless individuals and couples transform their relationship with finances. Get ready to discover how resolving your money issues and finances might just be the key you need to unlock deeper intimacy and better sex. Let's get some. Shawna Game, welcome back to The Naked Connection. I'm really excited to have you here a second time today. You're like becoming our money relationship expert on the show.
I love that title. I will happily accept. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And I know we're like reintroducing this topic of finances and relationship and sex. And with your book coming out, Unraveling Your Relationship with Money, it's so exciting to think about how can we look at this from a little bit of a deeper lens. And if anyone's listening and you haven't tuned into the first episode with Shawna, go back, check that out, and then find your way back here. In thinking about all of the power that's in this book that you put so much energy and research and time into, you talked a lot about money trauma in that. And I'm wondering, how have you seen really financial shame specifically show up in someone's sex life, in their intimate life, just in relationships in general?
I'm actually super thrilled that we're talking about it from this perspective because I think, you might agree, but I think the correlation between like intimacy, relationships, sex, and money is actually very deeply connected. And I think most people don't think that they are, but they really are. I think financial shame creates this like barrier to open communication because we just feel, when shame comes up, we feel so tiny, we feel so small. And I think that when there's partners or you're in some sort of sexual relationship and there is financial shame, you have this urge of wanting to hide, right? Not wanting to be seen by the other person. And so we can look at that and how that spills over to your emotional and intimate relationship. And you can see how if you're feeling some sort of financial shame, and that is the marker that a lot of us base our self-worth on, is how much money we have, what kind of career do we have, and does the other person have more or less than me, and how are they going to look at how I spend my money and the decisions that I make. And there's just this like roller coaster of thoughts that are going on in your head. And I think that those shame triggers can bring up that inadequacy place in us. And then we bring it into the bedroom. We don't want to expose ourselves. And so I think for a lot of people, I've seen a lot of couples who have intimacy issues because they're just overwhelmed by guilt of the financial decisions they have or haven't made. And so it's like this almost becomes like a turtle, like you want to hide in your shell. And then that leads to, not wanting to explore or be seen or have this kind of connection with your partner.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm taking a deep sigh because that feels like so true. And I think about how there's been so much societal pressure that's placed on men to be providers, protectors. And in a lot of ways in today's world, that is how much can I provide financially? How can I protect through the wealth that I have created? And if coming up in today's work world that isn't hitting the mark of where you want to be, that as you're describing, like the shell can form. And I don't know if there have been studies done, but thinking about sexual dysfunction for men in the space of ED or premature ejaculation correlated to financial stability and confidence, what the relationship would be there. I'm super curious to know.
I am as well. I don't know if there are any studies, but I think there should be, because all of the things that you're talking about around men, I mean, talk about a demographic of people that have been raised with the assumption that you're the one responsible for, the financial needs in the relationship. And when that doesn't happen, and now we live in a completely different world than even our parents, certainly grandparents, where nowadays women could be the providers, or if you're in a same-sex relationship, it could be one person and the other person maybe stays at home or it does whatever, or maybe they don't have the thriving career, but there's such this is importance placed on the math side of money, which was really why I wrote this book, because I wanted to have a conversation about the emotional side and the irrationality and all these things we talk about, shame and vulnerability, and how this impacts all these areas of your life. And so I think for men, gosh, I really feel for them, because there's got to be a direct correlation with all of the things that you talked about. I can't see how there wouldn't be. And I think it takes a lot of shedding of layers to be able to be a man, from my perspective, as much as I can imagine, to be able to show up in a relationship if you don't earn an income, or maybe you don't earn as much as the other person, and feel as valuable and as worthy, and be able to express yourself in, an intimate, emotional, sexual experience without that coming into play.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing. I'm curious about how you work with individuals and couples to explore their money trauma. How do you see a way to translate that into someone, whether it is directly exploring the trauma that I have around money or the wounds that I have around money, and how they could use that process to shift their...
Yeah, I mean, I think this work is so deeply underrated because it's so particularly powerful when you do this kind of work. Money wounds, I think, particularly feelings around abundance and self-worth, like often those mirror the challenges with vulnerability in relationship. And we know, like, a cornerstone in a relationship is being able to have trust and being able to be vulnerable. And so I often find couples who ignore having money conversations out of a place of fear of there being money shame or judgment or any of those sorts of things. Those are usually the couples that also find themselves in some sort of intimacy issue, because it is a very intimate conversation. You're exposing yourself. And so I talk about this in the book, but each of us have what I call a money story that was shaped when we were younger. So we carry with us a lot of the gunk and the good stuff, but it's usually some bit of gunk from our childhood of beliefs that our family had, of things that they talked about or didn't talk about around money. And they're stored almost unconsciously in us, right? At a really deep level inside of us. And those things are working almost on an autopilot basis, right? They're informing the choices that we have around money, our view around money, and how we interact with money. And so I think, one of the powerful exercises that couples can do is to write out their money story, like really think about, what were those things from my childhood that I just inherently downloaded about money, good or not good, and then come together and share those stories in a really non-judgmental, like a curiosity space, right? So you're just trying to learn more about the partner. But then for each person, I think it's equally important to think about, how does this story bleed over into all the areas of your life? So sleep, career, intimacy, friendships, what you do for fun, mindset, all of those areas. And when you start to just do this kind of awareness work, around these areas is, whoa, okay, this is connected to this, it's connected to that, and that's connected to here. And so you start to almost paint a picture of how money and these beliefs weave their way through all of these areas of life. And I think for couples, if we focused on doing more of this kind of work and less of the either sneaking in what you bought or, coming to your partner, like, you spent $50, out with your friends. Like, how could you do? We took down that volume and traded it in for something that was more this curiosity piece and this deep understanding. Not only in doing that are you building intimacy, but I think then that bleeds over to when you are in moments of intimacy, of feeling more just on a deeply rooted level, like connected with that person.
Thinking about conversations about money, typically it's like, okay, what are the bills? What are we budgeting? It's like you described this like math equation, and there's so much bubbling up in everyone that's living underneath the surface within that conversation.
1,000%.
Even if you did this process of writing your money story by yourself, whether you shared it or not, gaining that insight for yourself of, so that's why I get upset with my partner when she goes and blows $200 at the nail salon because of X, Y, and Z from my past experience growing up, or I had this belief you shouldn't spend money that you don't have. So better understanding for yourself where the emotions are coming from or the reactions are coming from.
Yeah. And I think, it's easy to overlook that as an important piece of the puzzle. But if it is that she's going out and blowing $200 on her nails, but then you hear her side of the story, and maybe she wasn't able to do anything like that as a child. Like maybe that wasn't an option for her. And so that feels like a way of almost healing that kind of inner child wound, if you will. I mean, there's lots of different variations of how that could go, but when you hear the perspective, I think that helps you go, okay. When I talk a lot about, we need to start focusing on spending money on the things that we value. But in order to do that, we have to understand what are the things that we actually value.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people, I hear this common phrase of, the thing that freaks me out most about money is I'll never have enough. Like, there'll just never be enough, no matter how much money you make, right? And so my kind of quip back is, okay, what is enough? What does that look like to you? And that's like a puzzling moment sometimes for people to think about that. But if we look at it from this perspective, like, how can we ever know if we've gotten to enough if we don't know what enough actually looks like? The same thing when we're having these kind of things bubble up to the surface, right? About how our partner spends or doesn't spend or saves or doesn't save or, all of these different things. It's understanding like where that kind of wound comes from in ourselves, right? Expressing it to the partner, having the partner being able to express back their reasoning for why they do things, and then say, okay, we've got now both perspectives. If spending $200 on the nails is something that she really values, and I can come to peace around that, knowing that maybe somewhere else we don't spend as much, that starts to create this really deeply emotionally enmeshed, like unified plan around money that takes away, again, I'm all about, can we strip away the judgment, the shame and the guilt? And we have too much of that, like in our lives.
Yeah.
So I think all of those things really start to work together, right? It starts to weave a different narrative about money with yourself and with your partner.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Okay. I love this. How do you see these patterns affecting who someone is attracted to?
It's really such a fascinating study. We tend to actually be attracted to a version of either what we saw as a child or what we wanted the opposite experience to be, right? And it's really interesting when it comes down to attraction. It can be influenced by a lot of different patterns. Like we might equate, generosity with love, or financial stability with safety. We might kind of put things together that don't necessarily correlate, but in our head we do, because we have this kind of unconscious bias towards things. In my book, I talk about 4 different money personalities, and I name them as animals. We have a nightingale, which is somebody who just completely kind of like freaks out about money. It's every conversation is just too stressful, right? They don't want to deal with it.
Uh,
Then we have somebody who is the lion. That's like me, who's just kind of like a go big or go home type person. Like they just swing for the fences. They don't often deal with the little details that maybe the nightingale personality might deal with. And then we have a turtle, which it's just, it sounds, they're just slow, steady, don't like a lot of risk, might not do certain things with their money because it's just, that is too scary. And then we have the wolf, which is somebody who like overanalyzes every decision to the point where they almost don't make a decision. Like they want to hit these like goalposts, like by age 30, I'm going to have this much saved. And they've got all these big lofty things, but they don't kind of charge at it. So I say that with some sort of perspective that I think it's important to not only know your money personality, but also the person you're in a relationship with, and look at it from what are the strengths of each of these different personalities, and how do we play more to those strengths, knowing that each of us are going to have some blind spots and some, weaknesses. I think, if we can, I'm not a big one on categorizing people, but I think it's important for this kind of conversation around these like unconscious patterns and, meshing with someone. I just don't want people to, what often happens is we look for, like I was saying, oh, they make a lot of money. So that means this is a safe relationship for me to be in. So trying to not make those kind of attachments, I think, is important because life is wild and whirly, and there are a lot of things that could happen that could come in and shake that financial stability. And if that's what we've created as a safety measure, then we're going to feel, completely dysregulated in the relationship. So I think, looking at who this other person is, looking at what their strengths are and seeing, okay, how do we, knowing these strengths, how do we bring this relationship to a point that works best for both of us?
yeah. Yeah. I would imagine that there are probably a lot of times when the personality types are the opposites. You're a lion with a turtle.
Yeah. I'm a lion with a nightingale. My husband is a nightingale.
You're like,
But I think that actually is a good thing because if you had 2 personalities that were the same, I think it might actually, butt heads a bit, because the beauty of being different is not only are you going to have different strengths, but I think you're able to also help the other person with their blind spots. And I think that works better than if we were just a, photocopy of each other.
I agree in the sense of if you are both 2 peas in a pod in the same way, you probably are going to have big blind spots when it comes to the money space, as opposed to if you were a little bit different and just learned how to navigate that difference together and rely on the pros of both of your dynamics. It's so interesting to think about how in the dating space, thinking like maybe a woman grew up in a family where money was really scarce. And so she is adamant about never being in that space. So she's consciously or not looking for a man that can provide for her and keep her safe financially. Or thinking like maybe a man grew up in a low socioeconomic dynamic and watched his father really go out into the trenches and work really hard. And the maybe the mom was like spending all of the money. And so he's like, I don't want to be with a woman that's spending all of my money. Like looking at how that can really influence who we are attracted to and what happens when we get into those relationships is super interesting.
I think the thing to think about is these unconscious patterns are, like I said, they're like the operating system in us that are kind of, just working in our brain in the background. But I think, the situations that you just described, which is really cool, is when you do this work around money story, I think you could start to realize, okay, that was my parents' dynamic and that was their experience around money. And it doesn't mean I have to have the same experience. I can actually, with the same almost factors, if you think that way, create something different,
Mm,
knowing that was their experience and I don't want that experience. And I think that knowing that hopefully leads you to a place of being more vulnerable and being able to talk about these topics, which again then goes back to creating more of a intimate relationship with someone because you're openly expressing rather than it coming out in like anger or judgment or some of the ways that money does creep into our conversations.
I'm just curious about in all of the research that you've done, if you have seen whether the dynamic of someone's relationship with money, whether that influences their ability to articulate themselves in terms of what they want in their sexual relationship or asking for what they want in bed. Anything come up?
Yeah, I think, someone's relationship with money reflects a lot of their self-worth and boundaries just in
Mm,
life. And I think that when we feel unworthy about money, we may struggle in the bedroom to feel a sense of worth and feel we can ask for what we want. I think there's a lot of connection there. And I think what often shows up in not wanting to speak up because you feel again, you feel small. You feel like I see this particularly around men where it's I'm not the breadwinner or I'm not earning as much as my partner. And therefore, I don't feel as worthy as the other person. And in the bedroom, I feel I bring that sort of submissive attitude about life into the bedroom. And yeah, not, I think if it's hard in my perspective, and there isn't a lot of scientific study around this, but my perspective is if it's hard to talk about money, which is the longest relationship we're going to have with something outside of ourselves, right? If you think about it, that's really what it
yeah.
is. If we have trouble talking about that, and particularly talking about the things that suck, the things that are not so good, how can that not bleed into being able to ask for what we want in bed, in our career, in life, in anything? I think it has a really strong connection there,
Yeah.
and that's where I think like doing some of this deep work where we can separate those two things, just because whatever the amount of money is in your bank account doesn't equate to how great you are in bed. Like those two things shouldn't be connected.
Mhm.
And yet the stories, I know particularly for women, we have all these stories going through our heads when we're being intimate, like, oh, it was in my body. This is what about this? Or there's all of this gunk that's going on in our head. And again, I don't know the male experience. So I don't, I can't speak to what is or isn't going on in their brain. But I have to believe that it shows up in these areas, particularly like just not being able to speak up and ask for what you want with confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. And gosh, because what you're describing, it sounds like this kind of becomes this cyclical presence that starts to unfold in how someone engages in the world. And I'm wondering what is the beginning of how to loop out of that? Obviously, there's like tactical things that someone can do to start making more money, to get a different job, like all of those sorts of things. But how do you begin to change that cycle that's unfolding, that's leading to feeling down about the money, to then showing up and not feeling confident in asking for what I want, and then feeling like wanting to hide and be small? How do we unravel that?
It takes a lot of work. I'm not going to, sugarcoat it, but I think the first place is the awareness piece. So understanding first that there may be a connection and that might be something I need to explore, I think is step one. And that sounds easy, but that actually takes a lot of courage to be able to step into that space. There's an exercise I talk about a lot called financial forgiveness, and it really works. It's pretty simple. You set a timer on your phone for 15, 10, 5 minutes, whatever feels good to you. And you literally brain dump everything about money that you're upset about, the mistakes, everything without judgment, right? We're just getting it out of our head and on paper. And then I want you to step away from that for 24 hours. Come back in 24 hours. I want you to read through it, right? From a different lens, because after you've written it, you can read it and see it differently. Like it lands differently emotionally. But then I want you to get rid of it, burn it, shred it, tear it up, float it down a river. I don't care what you do with it. There is scientific studies around getting out of your head, writing down, and then, getting rid of that piece of paper on what that does psychologically in our brains. It's like it ignites a little switch where it tells our brain, like, we maybe don't have to keep doing things the same way. Maybe we can actually let go of some of that stuff. And then from there, the next thing I want you to do is write something. We talked about money story, which is your past. And that is, we can't change it. It is what it is. But the future, actually, we can create. So I want you to write what I call your money hero story. So the version of what you want, your experience, your human experience around money and how that touches all areas of your life, what you want that to look like going forward. Because once we can explain to ourselves, it's like the enough thing. Once we can explain to ourselves what we want that experience to be like, then we can actually take the steps, both financially and emotionally, to step into that. But if we stay in this kind of place where nothing is really defined, it's just we're not feeling great about any of this, there's no direction to it. So we need to give our brain, our body, and practically our money like a roadmap for where we want it to go. And that can change, of course, but let's at least get like some direction that we're going in. So those sorts of things. I mean, there's so much I could talk about. Yeah, I was just saying one other exercise that I use this personally, is when you notice you're in a place where you're feeling money shame or you're feeling anxiety around money, like maybe when you open your bank account app, your heart rate starts racing, or your palms get sweaty, or something is going on there. Give yourself a time frame. I tell myself, you got 5 minutes to think about money, 5 minutes to think about all the horrible thoughts that you've got going through your head. And once that 5 minutes is up, you're not thinking about this any longer. So it's setting boundaries also for yourself, which most people are like, you can do that. I'm like, absolutely. You're in control of this experience.
Yeah.
So you can think about that practically, like before you're headed into the bedroom with someone. Like, I am, during this time frame, not allowing my brain to correlate money with self-worth, or to have any sort of thoughts around money, or to bring a shameful feeling in. Like, I'm choosing to have a different experience. And you can set that boundary for yourself, because our thoughts are directly connected to our feelings, which are directly connected to our actions. And so we just kind of have to rework the system. So it just takes day after day of doing some of this work to be able to piece it together.
I'm thinking about how could someone, if someone is in a space of money scarcity or money insecurity, and they are in this place of, I would love to find a partner, but I'm not where I want to be. I don't have what I want yet. How does that influence their dating choices? What's unfolding there?
I think it influences a lot, because you may choose the wrong partner because you correlate, again, financial safety and security with something that is numbers based that could go away at any point in time. So I think thinking about, what does being safe mean to you? What does that look like? Is there a money component? There might be. And if there is, that's perfectly fine. But just know that money component has an asterisk, right? It could be here now. It could leave. It could come back. Who knows? We don't know what this is going to look like. So is there a way we can base, safe, practical, secure around things that maybe aren't so directly tied to money? But I think, scarcity mindset, it can stop us from going out with people. It can stop us from being vulnerable. And, what I would love to see is people being able to have conversations around money about the things that really stress them out, or things that they think they've made a mistake around, and having this conversation from a place of wanting to connect more and feeling okay that the other person might not receive it the same way, but I'm able to express. When I went out with my husband, we met on Match.com, and we both had been previously married. I'm a money expert, so obviously I'm going to talk about money, but he brought it up actually as well. And it was more from the place of, what sort of shared life do we want to create? And we thought about it more from that perspective than how much do you make? What's your credit score? All of those things that can change over time. I think that it's very healthy when you're dating to be able to talk about these things. And I think you can almost use it as a marker of, is the other person willing to go there with you? Are they willing to be vulnerable with you or share something that might be a little bit difficult? Because again, I think that bleeds over into all the different areas of a relationship of being able to be exposed to like that.
Yeah, I actually am remembering as you're talking right now about the last time that you came on the show. And then in my personal life after that, I was dating someone for a while. And our conversation inspired me to be like, okay, let's talk about this in a way that isn't like, how much money do you make? But what is your experience like with finances? What is important to you? And it was really cool because I felt we did have a number of conversations about money and it didn't feel weird or uncomfortable. And it was a really wonderful experience in that regard and helped, I think, in some ways, I felt more connected and safer, regardless of understanding this person's numbers, just more of their approach. It's definitely something that I've taken with me since then and highly recommend for
I
anyone
love
that's
it.
too. Yeah. Yeah. It was amazing.
That is so cool. I love stories like that because I often tell people like what I talk about might seem bizarre because we all know that numbers are important. I'm not going to sit here and lie, but they can't be the most important thing, right? They just can't be because they can come and go so easily.
Mhm.
But I often tell people like just try, like for a day, just try to set like the 5-minute rule about what you're going to think about, or just try to come at your partner from a place of curiosity around money. Just try it. See what happens. Because I guarantee you're going to have a different experience. And then that's going to motivate you to, oh, wait a minute. Maybe there's something to this. Like maybe I can dip more toes in this water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Just experimenting and seeing what happens, really. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's all a giant experiment, right?
Yes.
And
That's
it's
life is.
who says we have to play by these, set 10 rules around money? It's ridiculous. We're all so different. So it's all about finding what's going to create the best, relationship, not only with yourself and money, but with your partner and money.
Mhm. Okay, so what's a common lies that we tell ourselves about money that might influence our love lives or our relationship?
Well, there's so many. I
Yeah.
think,
Like, how much time we have?
I think that's a whole other episode. I think really, we've talked about the core one is that, the lie is that my self-worth equals my net worth.
Hmm.
And therefore, if I don't have what I consider to be enough money, or I'm not at the place that I feel like I should be at, that I have to show up smaller in all sorts of situations, including in the bedroom and being intimate, that I can't fully own like my experience as a human. I'm not doing it quote unquote perfectly. I think there's this myth or perception around money that we have to follow like these 10 rules and we have to do them all perfect or we're lesser of a human being. And that's just not the case. I think also what's really interesting about financial shame and money, I think, and the bedroom is when we have financial shame, we almost have this surprising inability to receive.
Mm.
So whether that's compliments or gifts or pleasure, like we create this scenario where I'm not worthy of receiving because I've done things that I feel are shameful. And so we might also create this like hyper independence where we come from a place of, I've got this all figured out, I'm good, because we don't want to have those conversations. We don't want to expose that side of ourselves. And, I think that's a real myth that we feel like we're the only ones who have experienced something around money that feels like, oh, I don't know if I should have done that. I'm going to tell you, I've worked with probably over like 400 people and their money. I don't care how much money you make. We all have like basically done the same version of, a laundry list of what we would consider mistakes around money. It's just, this is human nature. It's messy, right?
Yeah.
So let yourself be okay with that messiness and let your partner have messiness too. And let those things just kind of exist outside of the bedroom, right? We can let those kind of stand on their own.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I am so glad that you came back and that you are releasing this book and diving even more into the relationship that one has with money. And I appreciate you sharing this kind of adjacent perspective on the impact that it really has on our romantic relationships and how we show up in the bedroom and in dating and just love in general. Everyone needs to go check out your book. We'll definitely put that in the show notes. But I'm wondering as we close out here, if there's anything that we haven't shared that you want to touch on, or yeah, just checking in.
I would just say that I feel like the best thing you can do for yourself and for any relationship is to really just own your story around money. And rather than it being something that is a detriment or something that is shameful or there's guilt or judgment around, look, we can change how we feel about those things. We can look at them as, wow, if all those things didn't happen, I wouldn't be here or I wouldn't be with this partner right now. And it doesn't mean you have to, replicate those things going forward in the future. You can change that dynamic, but nothing is set in stone. And, again, I would love for everyone listening, give yourself just a day to play in this space and see how you feel. See how it might change things. I have worked with even like the most like earliest men who would never let down their guard, and they've come back to me like, oh my gosh, I did this work around my money story and I never realized this stuff. And now I can have a different relationship, not only with money in my life, but with my partner. And it's just rocking their world. So I would say like nobody is too proud to do this work. And it does really change your experience just all the way around.
I love hearing that. Yeah. You're doing phenomenal work in supporting people out there in the world. And yeah, for all of my incredible burly men that are listening, try it out for a day and see what happens. I love it. Shawna, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoy having you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Naked Connection. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Trust me on this, your sex life and that special someone in your life will thank you for it. And if you really love the show, please take a moment and leave a 5-star review or a written review and let me know what you think. It would mean so much to me and this show. Until next time, happy connecting.